was in high school, I had a really good friend who lived next door to a house that was always up for sale. People would move out in the middle of the night without a word, and it hadn't had the same owner for more than 6 months straight for a couple of years. One night, we were really bored, and he suggested to go and explore the house next door, since it had been empty for so long. We go around back, and there's a dog door that he can crawl through, and he unlocks the door and lets me in. The house itself is really unremarkable. It looks like it was built maybe around the 1950s and was a craftsman-style house in an older, nicer part of town. The kitchen had a really nice built-in breakfast table set up against a picture window. The house's electricity was off, but you could see the streetlight through the window. My friend and I sat down on the floor across from this table, and we're just hanging out and talking. All of a sudden, my friend screams, and in that instant, my vision goes black. But it wasn't that I couldn't see. My body was engulfed in this sickly coldness from head to toe. I started screaming, and I feel my friend's hand grabbing mine and pulling me in some direction forcefully. My vision slowly comes back, and I start to warm up when I realize that we're outside under the streetlight. It was December and should have been much warmer inside of that house. Finally, I look at my friend, and he looks scared. I'm really confused and kind of panicked, and finally asked him what happened. He says that as I was talking, this figure that was all black and had a vague shape of a girl crawled out from under the table and sat on top of me. Apparently, I started looking around with my eyes wide open, like I couldn't see, and he was so freaked out that he pulled me out of the house. We're still friends, and we bring it up every now and then, but the story itself never changes, and it still sends chills down my spine. To this day, I've never felt such blackness or coldness in my life. It was palpable, almost sticky. For a couple of days afterward, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling, and I could never walk past that house again. I lived in a bizarre little house as a child. It was incredibly tall and thin, like an attached house except freestanding, with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. It was full of quirks, such as 2 fully functional fireplaces, a shower stall in the center of the basement, a backyard so small that you could not take 5 paces without hitting the fence, and an old-timey rope pull-down dumbwaiter that led from the kitchen to my bedroom. I loved that weird little place, but unfortunately, it was incredibly old, and half of its charm was the fact that it seemed to have been designed by an inarticulate conclave of lunatics, and eventually the repair costs exceeded what my parents were willing to sink into it, and we had to move. Preparing for the move was a chore. I packed most of my stuff myself, and I had taken to throwing stuff down the dumpster and shoving all my clothes so thickly in my closet that they became single solid brick of fabric. While clearing the closet out, in fact, I came across a feature I hadn't noticed before, an attic entrance in the roof. Being an adventurous kid, I opened her up, stood on the clothes brick, and began my first and last exploration into the topmost part of our weird little house. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't as dark as it should have been. The place was strung with old red Christmas lights, which still burned with leftover incandescence, and a dozen little cracks and holes peeped through into all the bedrooms below. The second thing I noticed was that the place was set up for habitation. The insulation was plastic way. There was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets, and a rusted mint green refrigerator which still worked when I tested it. The third thing was the bones. There were lots of bones. I was a kid at the time with a limited understanding of anatomy, but there were bones of all types heaped into series of piles around the center of the attic. Small and large, clean and white, from every and any imaginable sort of creature, haphazardly stacked in a half-dozen clumps. 2 of them were blackened as if someone had tried to burn them, and the walls nearest to those blackened piles were scrawled in dark bone-charred messages. Mostly they were just smears, but the word sorry appeared more than once. That room has been sitting over my head for 8 years while I slept. My mom's whole side of the family was raised Catholic. All went to the same church in a small town in the south. I was there one summer as a kid with my mom. I was maybe like 10 years old. My uncle's farmland backs right up to the church. Anyway, things haven't been going so well on the farm. Crops not growing right, healthy animals randomly dropping dead, chickens and small creatures showing up gutted, even though he had a donkey to protect his cattle. Just weird things that's never happened before. So one day, the adults are acting super weird and cagey. You know how, they act when something big is going down, but they don't want to scare the kids. Like that. My grandma, mom, uncle, aunt, some other cousins, and the priest and another man from the church are all hanging out on my uncle's farm. And they basically kick me out of the house to go play. Naturally, being a very curious kid, I climb as high as I can in the nearest tree to see the house, trying to eavesdrop. I hear a snippet of the conversation here and there, but can't figure out what they're up to. Everyone leaves the house, following the priest to the barn, stables, chicken coop, etc. This entire time, I'm watching from the tree. While they're all down at the stables, I hear the door to the house open, and a woman I've never seen before, maybe 30 years old, with brown hair and a blue dress, casually walks out the door. She briefly looks up at me in the tree. I wave. She ignores me and walks off down the dirt road. Once the adults are all done with whatever they're doing, we all gather in the dining room of my uncle's house to have some lemonade with my aunt, who made it because it was such a warm day. I decided to pipe up and ask them who the woman in the blue dress was, since I have never seen her visit before. Every adult in the room freaks out. My aunt starts crying. The priest looks like he might barf, and I'm told the woman was just visiting. Okay, whatever. A decade later is when my uncle finally tells me that woman I saw was an apparition that had started appearing to the parish at the church and next door on my uncle's land. They assumed she was a lost spirit trying to pass on, but after she attacked the priest at his house also nearby, and the farm animals started showing up dead, they decided she was some sort of demon who appeared as a young woman to hide her true nature. The day I saw her from the tree, the adults had gotten permission from the Catholic Church to perform an exorcism on my uncle's land. It appears I witnessed her leaving. I wonder where she was going. I'm 26 years old today, and the story of Evelyn, as the parishioners started calling her, she's been spotted inside the church, still gives me goosebumps. She was completely expressionless when she looked up at me in that tree. Didn't seem in any hurry to leave either. The moment she was gone, the crops started recovering, and we started finding dead and eviscerated livestock. I'm not religious, and I'm generally a pretty big skeptic, but I'll never be able to explain what I saw from the oak tree that day. This will get buried, but I have never gone camping or out into the woods at night after this trip. A few friends and I had a long weekend off from school. We decided to go camping in the North Georgia mountains. We packed a big 10-person tent. There were 5 of us, 2 guys, 3 girls, and loaded up my buddy's truck. He and I had some experience being outdoors, camping, hiking, hunting, and he's an Army vet, so we really packed well and had all sorts of amenities, like a propane stove grill, fold-up cots, portable shower. We were in it for the whole weekend. We left Wednesday afternoon and parked the truck in a small town and started hiking into the woods to find a spot. It was a fairly normal hike until we got about 4 to 5 miles in. The first time we noticed something strange was when we came into a little clearing in the woods with a big pond, tiny lake in it. We stepped into the open area and everything stopped. No birds chirping, no squirrels running around. And even the clouds and wind seemed to stop moving. My buddy and I both thought, well shit, there's gotta be a predator nearby, and took out our handguns, just in case. I've never seen a bear in Georgia, so we figured it was a mountain lion or maybe some coyotes. My friend and I are looking around the edge of the clearing, and he grabbed me. He nodded across the water, and when I looked, I saw what seemed to be a woman standing at the tree line. She was maybe 150 yards away. We assumed she must live somewhere nearby, and so we continued walking past the water and clearing. As we headed back into the woods, I looked over my shoulder at where she was standing, but she was gone. The sounds of the forest returned once we got into the trees. We made a campsite. It was getting late, and we didn't want to be stuck building a camp in the dark. We got everything unpacked, set up, and built a fire, popped a couple beers, and sat down to hang out. There was a girl I was interested in on the trip, and we had been flirting, so after a few beers and the sun went down, we snuck away from the campfire under the pretense that she wanted to help set up part of the tent. We started fooling around, and after a few minutes she stopped, and she looked at me funny. I asked what was wrong, and she said, "Nothing. It just got really quiet." We both quickly dressed and headed back outside to the fire. The others hadn't noticed anything strange and didn't mention anything wrong, except joking with us that it took us a long time to fix the tent. On the first morning, we found that the propane stove had been turned on, but not ignited, and had gone empty overnight. None of us had used it. The second morning, we noticed some things had gone missing. A lantern we left outside by the fire was gone. My crush's sweatshirt, she left it on a little folding chair. We figured we must have just misplaced things. During the second full day, Friday, we were looking for a waterfall that we read online was in the area. We were following the river upstream when everything went silent again. My buddy nudged me while we were walking and indicated up to the top of the hill next to the river. I looked up through the trees and was just able to make out the figure of the same woman. Same clothes and all. I couldn't tell if she was looking at us or not, but she was just standing there. My buddy told the girls he thought he saw a mountain lion following us and was gonna go scare it off. He said he scared it off to the girls, but he told me aside that the woman wasn't there when he got up there. We hiked back to the camp and found it a mess. It wasn't totally trashed, but it was clear something had gotten into our stuff. We both took our guns to bed with us. That night, shit went sideways. I remember waking up because my crush was squeezing my arm. We had been sleeping cuddled up together. I opened my eyes and she hushed me before I could ask what was wrong. There was complete silence all around the tent. I looked across the tent and my buddy was sitting halfway up looking around. We both stayed awake for the next 2.5 hours until the sun started coming up, and packed our stuff and we headed out. The entire hike back into the town was eerily silent. There were a couple of points I thought I saw the woman through the trees, but never got a clear sight of her. After we were safely back on the road home, the girls and my buddy all started to tell everyone about moments they thought they had heard saw the woman all weekend, but were too freaked out to mention it out loud. The wild part was none of us could describe her face. It was almost like it was blurry. No idea who she was, but I've never been camping or hiking at night since.